before we move on to the fifth tone, again, I want to remind you that what takes place at the tonal level is not something that we have access to. So it's not like it's something you're working with, but what's very important to see is that the senses that are involved, that this is a key for you. In other words, if you're going to be a first tone, you know that most of the awareness that you gather is rooted in smell. Now that's regardless of whether you have the whole channel or stream or gates in the stream of smell. Remember, we're dealing with a binary. So if you have somebody, for example, that has inner vision, you're going to have two kinds of inner vision people. You're going to have inner vision people that have a defined ajna in their rave chart. You're going to have inner vision people that have an undefined ajna in their rave chart. And they're going to be defined and undefined in different ways, if you know what I mean. In other words, you're going to get all of the varieties, but the theme, the underlying tonal theme remains the same. So it's not about saying, oh, I'm a 4, I'm inner vision, but I've got an open mind. That's terrible. It's not true. It can be wonderful. Or to say the opposite. In other words, you cannot relate that to the design level. You can only do that when you get to color. Tomorrow when I start talking about color, then you're going to see you can take that immediately into your design. In other words, you can use that information instantaneously as something that you can work with that has analytical value and gives you that aha. Now you're not going to get that aha, coming from the fourth tone, whether you got an open mind or an undefined mind, it isn't going to make any difference. In other words, it's simply that at the tonal level, that's what it's all about. And genetically, you're going to respond to that tonal level regardless of what your definition or lack of definition is going to be. We now enter into murky waters and muddy ground. I can't stand the bastards, eh? We come to the solar plex binary. When you look at the first 4 tones and you see that those tones are related to awarenesses that operate and function, and that the last 2 tones we're looking at this afternoon are related to a center that is not aware and it is basically dominated by a motor, then one of the things to recognize about the way in which these tones can operate is that they will operate very differently, beginning in 2027 when we have a new generation come into the world who has a different kind of solar plex and operates with solar plex awareness or spirit consciousness. In other words, what I'm going to describe to you this afternoon is what the motor does to these tones. In other words, living out the tone through the motor frequency, but recognize that is what is. But after all, we're in the embrace of a mutation that's taking place. It's not like suddenly the mutation is there in 2027. That mutation is already being carried by the children that are going to give birth to the children in 2027. In other words, there's a process that's at work here. So the tonal qualities or the tonal values that I'm going to give you in relationship to the solar plex, this is based on the solar plex being a motor. And of course, being on the fact that this is the only awareness that does not operate in a frequency that is reliable. I mean, the one thing you know about the ajna and mind is that its frequency is all time. So it's very reliable. In other words, you're going to be able to process a thought forever. I mean, that's the whole thing. That's why when you give your mind authority, you really get yourself into problems because, of course, you're going to deal with that thought for the rest of your life. It just, that's the frequency of mind. Frequency of the spleen, we know, it's instantaneous, spontaneous, existential, in the moment. But when you're dealing with the solar plex binary, you're dealing with a wave that operates in time. And that's saying that wave that operates in time, that we have frequencies that are of different qualities and of different timings. It's one of the first things you learn as an emotional person is that the wave you've got with your mother is very different than the wave of your lover. You can have these waves that last a lifetime, literally, and you can have waves that last, 30 seconds. It's a very, very complex thing to have this emotional motor. So here in dealing with the solar plex, it's one of the things to recognize is that everything is operating through the emotional field. In other words, that the fifth tone of judgment, God forbid, fifth tone of judgment operates through an emotional field. Now we're going to see here that we have the two streams, and the two streams that we have is that we're going to have a collective abstract stream, and that's of course this stream of judgment, which is the stream of feeling that goes from the 41 all the way up to the 35. And then we're going to have the sixth tone, and the sixth tone is tribal, and it is the tribal, and it is rooted in touch, this tone of acceptance, and it starts with the 19 and it goes to the 40. There's no logic here. This is the only binary that has no logic. So one of the things to recognize about the solar plex binary is that the solar plex binary cannot have lasting impact on humanity. Remember that the only things that can have lasting impact on humanity are patterns that are reliable. It's the only thing. Nothing else has that lasting impact. And of course, the moment that you take away the logic, you take away any ability to be able to prove or verify in a way that is acceptable to the collective the validity of anything experienced tonally through these particular tones. Now again, when we're dealing with the emotional system, because we're dealing with volatility, there's great volatility in the way in which these departments operate. You know, it's one of those things where if you go from one of the other departments and you bang into somebody that, you know, in the solar plex department, it really looks weird. I mean, you know, there's all this up and down, and there's all this stuff going around, and all this energy being poured out, and all of these things. In other words, it can look rather chaotic. There doesn't seem to be a logical pattern to it. Judgment. When we were talking about uncertainty, we were talking about taste, and we were talking about the stream that ran from the 58 up to the 16, and here we have its mirror. It's very important when you're looking particularly at the collective to look very carefully at the mirror. You know, there is an intrinsic relationship between the 58 and the 41. There's an intrinsic relationship between the 18 and the 30. There's an incredible relationship between the 48 and the 36. In other words, there's very, very profound connections between these gates operating in collective streams in the mirror on the other side. If you look very carefully at the channel of recognition, the channel 4130, you'll see that it is all about recognizing what one can feel. Just as the 1858 is all about recognizing what one can or could or should or might correct. So there is in the fifth tone, you have the whole human way of life. Chaos. It's the whole human way of life. After all, this is the human way. Now, of course, what we have with the fifth tone is at the moment that you're carrying the fifth tone, everything about your life is ultimately going to be about experience. Everything. And that the fifth tone will never ever bring awareness. Now, by the way, awareness is overrated. It really is. It's like enlightenment and all these other terms. It's really overrated. I mean, after all, if you don't have a defined awareness system, technically speaking, mechanically speaking, you're not aware. I mean, you can be aware of awareness. You know, you got an open spleen, you got an open ajna, you can be aware of awareness. But technically speaking, you know, you don't have an awareness system that is operating consistently. That doesn't mean that somebody with open awareness centers, you know, cannot be awake. Of course they can be awake. I mean, awareness is overrated, like intelligence. It's overrated. All of those things are overrated. You don't have to believe that. Makes people nervous. Those are the things that people like. They want to be aware. They want to be enlightened. They think it's special. And of course, it helps them to think that it's special because it gives them an excuse why they're not there. Oh, it's so hard to get there. They don't want to find out that, really you can have I can take somebody with an IQ of 80 and give me enough energy. I will teach them. Anybody. So awareness is something that's deeply overrated. So if you're carrying the fifth tone, don't feel bad. It's overrated. You're here to be running around in the circus. And nobody runs around in the circus better than a fifth tone. I mean, that's their life, man. They're in the circus. They're leaping from this swing to that swing, and they're blowing themselves out of the cannon. They're going through the whole story. I mean, it's the human way. And of course, the whole thing for everybody else is that when you're all gathered around in a group department meeting, nobody wants them to show up. Oh, no, not now. Keep the humans away. Let the rest of us work this out, okay? Because we have to teach them because they're never going to be aware. It's so cute, no? This quality of humanness, racing along. And of course, while they're racing along, they're full of judgment. Right? See, it's only when you get to the end of the race that you know the results. That's one of the things about the abstract way, that while you're running the race, you can't say, I'm leading. Wait till the race is over. And of course, this is the whole thing about the fifth tone. The whole thing about the fifth tone is, look, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it. You're going to die before you get it. Now, of course, all the fifth tones get really nervous. What does that mean? What is he saying? Eh? And it's the whole point. I mean, after all, awareness would stop a 35-36 from being a complete and utter unpredictable turd. I mean, it really would. It's not there. And the whole thing about the fifth tone is that they have to see, look, what we are is we're the dumb lemmings. We're here to guide everybody into the sea. If we keep running, they're going to run after us. What a crazy world. This is the human world. You keep running, Satchel Paige, great black pitcher in America. He said, don't look behind you. Somebody may be catching up. That's us. Running. That's the fifth tone. That's their whole thing. And while they're running, they're telling you what's right and wrong. And you see, ideas, the human experience has power. That's great. You've all heard me say when you ask me how I am, so far, so good. It's a New Yorker cartoon from the 30s, after the Depression. And there's an executive that's jumped off a building, commits suicide. And there's a guy sitting in his office looking out the window, and he sees this guy falling. He says, are you okay? And the guy says, so far, so good. That's the human way. That's the fifth tone. And you see, they have their judgment all along the way. Oh, so far, so good. Nope. Thank you. Well, you see, they don't know any better. They just don't. See, the pure humanness in us doesn't want to know anything. It just wants to do. It wants to do. And it wants to do what feels good. That's what it wants to do. That's humans. They want to do what feels good. I mean, if you go down and you distill humanity down to its very, very basic ingredient, that's humanity. Let me do what feels good. Let me take what feels good. Let me eat what, all of that. It's all there. And remember that the moment that you get into the solar plex system, that you get into food and you get into sex. And of course, the solar plex binary is responsible, oh my God, for our sexual life. Can you imagine? Do what feels good. So mechanically we're designed that when you do it, it feels good. And we don't care about anything else. You're not going to worry about your taxes while you're making love. Doesn't work that way. You forget about what you have to do yesterday and tomorrow. It's gone. That's the mechanics. That's fifth tone business. That it feels good and I don't care what it means. And I don't care what it leads to. So far, so good. This is the fifth tone. And it's us. I mean, when I first started to go through this knowledge as a teacher, not just having taken in my experience. And when I got to this part, when I taught it in Europe 4 years ago, I could feel everybody squirming. And I wasn't doing it this way, integrating it into the streams. I was just doing cold tone. And I could see all these people looking and seeing very, my 5. Our vanity. You see, to be human is to do what feels good. We have to do what feels good. And it's not all of us. I mean, this is not the only department, But it is what frames our humanness. And of course, that gives all of us reason for caution. Doing what feels good for most of us is conditioned by all the fifth tones on the planet. And conditioned by their emotional wave. Remember that the tones are how we all are linked together in the whole. And that's taking place at a level that pays no attention to our personal lives. And of course, all it's doing with the fifth tone is that the fifth tone or any other tone is unleashed on us in order for others to take that in and be conditioned by it. So that we're all in the game together. The fourth tone that is going to release its inner vision will do so to people, will do so out of being defined or out of being undefined. We'll take it in or put it out or, there's all these different ways in order to get everybody else to connect to that information. In other words, 5/6 of the population, you're always trying to propagandize with your tone. That means that the friends that are around you, you'll discover very quickly, you'll see how often they're not your tone at all. Because that's not the way the program wants you to work. That's why it's not easy for us to have relationships of any kind. Because at the tonal level, which doesn't care about our personalities, doesn't care about our lives, at the tonal level, our job is to get everybody else to know our tone and for everybody else to let us know what their tone is. In other words, we're all in this propaganda business working for the totality. But of course, at our superficial level, we don't know that. And it can make things very uncomfortable. So here's that fifth tone saying, if it feels good, honey, do it. There's no inner vision, there's no outer vision, there's no security, there's no taste. It's all gone. There's just, come on, let's do it. And of course, it's emotional. It's emotional. It overwhelms all the rest of it. It just overwhelms it. And it overwhelms it either up, so that let's do it becomes let's do it, or it overwhelms them when they're down. It's an emotional field. Now, the emotional system is something that is truly beautiful, but it is only beautiful in time. It's rarely beautiful only in the now. It's time. If you want to love an emotional person, boy, do you have a study in hand. It takes time. Because it's there. But you see, you can't just get the impression of it, of the whole emotional being in a moment. It's not possible. They don't give that to you. And remember what the mind does with chemistry. Why do you think you get cranked if you're open and somebody puts their stuff in you? It's because your mind attaches itself to that chemistry. So when somebody puts an emotional down into you, your mind immediately grabs it, goes down with it. So you can imagine what this mad, mad, mad world is really like. Our humanness is just running around like chickens without our heads on. Over hill and dale into valley, we keep on running, don't know what the hell we're doing, and while we're running, we're deciding what everything is. That's why we need history. The history collects all of that. It gathers up all those experiences, and in gathering up those experiences begins to verify them. Begins to verify them in terms of consensus. And it's funny how that works, by the way. How those things can open up. There was this moment a couple of years ago. I can remember I was in Phoenix. And I was sitting in a hotel and there was some talk show on in the afternoon. And it was some woman that had, 25 personalities or 30 personalities. And the moment that somebody first told that experience, all of a sudden, all kinds of other people who had that experience began talking about it. This is the way that it works. All of a sudden, all of those experiences start coming out, and then we begin to see the place of that experience in the human field. That we know not to be surprised the next time that we meet somebody, who thinks that they're Al in the morning and Doris at night, or whatever the case may be. But they don't know that while they're running around through it. And somebody who is fifth tone, who has multi-personalities, whatever the hell that means, running through their life, they don't even know they have that until that experience is brought back to them. It's one of the extraordinary things about the fifth tone and the way it works. It's absolutely blind to any kind of true cognitive process. Remember, every single one of the tones is about cognition. This is anti-cognition. I don't have time to think, I'm busy. I don't have time to reflect, I'm doing. I don't want to think about it, I'm feeling. This is human. And it's always being caught in that funny balance of the wave. And you see, the only way it works is that at the end of the experience, only time will bring the perspective. Time. Whenever I meet experiential people, and of course they, by their very nature, have done a lot in this life, I always tell them their responsibility is get it back out. And it doesn't matter how they do that, whether they do a video for their grandchildren or, it doesn't matter what it is. Just the way to get it out. Because any abstract being who reaches the point at which the experience is done, in getting that experience back out verbally, that's something that's enormously healthy for them. Because regardless of what the experience has been, the moment that somebody will listen to it, it has value. When you think about that, that's very important for the emotional beings, and particularly for abstract beings. You see, the moment that you can tell somebody else your experience, that's the moment that your genes relax. That's what they want you to do. They want you to retell your story. And if you don't retell that story, they put all kinds of pressure on you until you blow up. And it's a very, very healthy thing to get that out. And you're getting it out without knowing why or of what value it is. Think about the fifth tone. It doesn't know why it ran through the valley. But in telling the story of running through the valley, it may find out why. It may suddenly have a grasp, able to make sense out of what was really going on in its process, through telling it, through trying to share the vision with somebody else. But in the pure fifth tone, none of that is part of their active process. That's for the rest of the abstract to work on. It's like somebody that does something spectacular, a discoverer, for example. The act of the discoverer is just pure fifth tone. Why did you climb the mountain? It was there. There's nothing. It was just there. They're running, so the mountain was in the way, so they go up the mountain. But for years afterwards, there's all kinds of people who write about their experience. Why they went up the mountain, why they were able to do it the way they did, what it meant. Now with modern deconstructionism, you can turn that into an act of God. The solace for the fifth tone is to recognize that it's the vanguard of human experience. The fifth tones that are around you in your life, they're the ones that are always going to be interesting. They're the ones that are always launching off into something. And of course, they're the ones that are ready and willing to enter into experiences that logic might say, wait a minute, chances are you're not going to make it. Chances are it's not going to be healthy. The abstract doesn't care. And the emotional abstract, that's blind. It's just blind. It'll just fly on its energy. When we're moving through the nature of the stream, we start with the 41st gate. The 41st gate is the initiating codon. It's the initiating force of experience. It is a deep, deep, deep pressure in us. Now remember my description of the 58, how there's a joy in that pressure. But when you're dealing with the 41, like everything in that stream, it's like going to a Chinese restaurant. It's either going to be sweet or it's going to be sour. And the pressure that is there in the 41 is a pressure that will naturally find its release through the sweet or the sour. And the sweet or the sour is the 30th gate, which is the gate of the fates. The idea that we are helpless, which has always permeated humanity, is a quality that the fifth tone brings us. They are helpless. They are just helpless. They fly through the sweet, they fly through the sour, there's nothing they can do. And because they are not there to be aware in that process, they are only victims in that sense, without that being a negative of that process. So the 41st gate pressures to the sweet or the sour side. The basic binary of human life is that experience, that valid experience must either be sweet or sour. And for the emotional being, there is nothing in between. Nothing. All you get in the end is a mouthful of sweet and sour, but you can still tell the difference. It's a funny thing about sweet and sour. They don't blend. You can still tell the sweet, you can still tell the sour. That's a good tongue twister. In the original description of the 41st gate, in the traditional I Ching, this is the work of the gardener cutting back plants in the fall. And cutting them back so that they will expand and grow even faster. Now I want you to think about that in the context of humanity. In the context of humanity, that means that many will enter into experience, few will survive. But the survivors will make it easy for many to have the same experience. That's something to understand. In other words, that if you're looking for sacrificial animals, you're going to find them in this stream. In their rushing headlong, there are those that will fall by the wayside. But they are a guide to those who will follow. And that those that succeed, they're the ones that will make it so much easier for the next generation to be able to do that. I mean, after all, it's like the sailing of ships. Many ships set out. Very few got anywhere. And finally you come along with whatever, a compass or, you suddenly have the capacity to survive the trip, to make the trip, and that experience then makes it possible for others to follow. And they don't have to take the same risks anymore. There are charts and maps and sextants and whatever you want, and they have the ability then to be able to follow in the footsteps. So what that's really saying is that when you're looking at that stream, what you're looking at is non-longevity. In other words, the survival rate isn't great. You see, the thing that keeps us alive is logic. It's logic. And the science of logic. So, we build hygiene systems for our communities, and we invent medicines, and we have hot running water, and all that kind of stuff. We do all of those things in order to be able to keep us healthy and alive. There's nothing about the abstract process that says they have to be healthy or that they have to stay alive. Nothing. Nothing. Think about that. That's really something. They're just here to be, the vanguard of activity. They're here to rush in where angels fear to tread. That's them. That's human. And of course, you get a high mortality rate when you're dealing with the abstract. And by the way, that mortality rate isn't just about the physical life. If you want to see breakdowns, the 19,000 nervous breakdowns, just look at 35, 36s. And if they're not breaking down, they're breaking somebody else down. The 30th gate. 30th gate's one of those, it's a strange one. It's the gate of the fates. And in being the gate of the fates, it is very deterministic in its way. That stream out of lack of awareness says that it's all written. There's no way that you're going to impress a 35, 36 with mutation. I mean, there isn't. Remember something about the collective. The collective follows Solomon's law. Nothing new under the sun. They don't want to know about what's new. They want to experience what's there. And they want to experience what's there in the continuity of that experience. So the 30th gate is the gate of fates, but remember something about the gate of fates. The gate of fates is the only gate that's there to burn you up. The clinging fire. Fourth line, burnout. I mean, it's really there to let you know that this life can be a quick flame out. Princess Diana with her son in 34th line. Flame out. That's a classic example of that. And a lack of awareness along the way. So in dealing with the 30, you have to see that the 30 is going to recognize, pinpoint a feeling that it is going to need to follow through. I mean, remember that. When the 18th gate sees what needs to be corrected, it is never going to be satisfied till it gets its chance. And that's without emotion. The moment that the 30th gate identifies with a feeling, the force behind that's enormous, and it doesn't stay consistent, which means that they suffer in holding on to that feeling. Suffer waiting for that opportunity to get it out, or, get full of hope, become obsessed. I mean, it can go in so many different directions. When the change comes and this stream no longer is of value, we won't have sex anymore either. Sorry, Randy. But you won't get there, so it doesn't matter. They'll all be saved, your interference. It is really there to set us on fire. I mean, that's what humans are. I mean, we're the masters of fire. Well, there's never been anything like us. And the first trait of really being human is when you control fire. You know, that's what made us different from everything else. And this is the human way. It's a burning. And you know, I talk to you a lot about chemistry. But you know, one of the funniest things that people don't think about is what you breathe. I mean, you breathe oxygen. Oxygen is an incredible corrosive. I mean, oxygen rips the side of your car apart and turns it into, you know, brown red dust. And we live on that. We take this burning fire into our systems, and our cells are burning. It's all burning. It's all fire. We're fire. This is the human way. And oh boy, do we love to burn, eh? And burn things. And, you know, our weapons, as long as they can make bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger flames, we get more and more excited by them. You know? Let's reproduce the sun, okay? Whoosh. You know? Fire. And of course, we burn with it. And that burning, that chemical burning, which is all about oxygen, is desire. It's desire. To be human is to be desirous. That's what it is to be human. That is what it is to be fifth tone, is to maintain the sanctity and purity of what it is to be human. And to be human is to be a blind, running, desirous thing. That's us. Ain't we great? Yeah. And we're plowing through, burning up everything in our path. And then when we run out of things to burn, we burn each other. I mean, after all, it's one of the most common things they do on this planet is they burn bodies, you know. Let's burn them. Throw them in the flames. Dust to dust and ashes to ashes. Funny stuff being a human being. And what you have to recognize is that out of that emotional desire comes the judgment. If it feels good, it's right. Now you know what the logic side thinks about that. Hey, excuse me. No. That's why we're uncontrollable as a species. You look at all the matrices. You know, no other form of life has an emotional system. And the 35 process, the 35 all the way down to the 41, you know, it's never going to be aware. It's only temporary. You know, it's been driving us for our whole human evolution. But you can see what it is. And that you can see how difficult it is for human beings to give up the not self. It's not going to be easy for any fifth tone to give up the not self. They're burning with a desire. And the desire becomes the point for them, the truth for them. Nothing else. Oh yes, they can suffer deeply because they don't get to the experience that they seek in their desire. And they can go down in their wave and be depressed and this and that and blah, blah, blah. They don't let go of it. That's why they can always burn out. You see, the spleen has a sense of humor. And it only has a sense of humor because everything passes in a moment, in a flash. Right? If you're a splenic person and you make love, chances are you're going to laugh. You know, because the moment it's over, it's incredibly absurd. It's gone. What was that? If you're an emotional person, you're serious. I mean, you're serious. There's nothing more serious than the 41 going to the 35. Nothing more serious on the whole planet. Take themselves serious. Take everything else serious. Now, of course, that seriousness can be light. They can be up in their wave. And you wouldn't think particularly that they were being serious because they're being light, but they're serious as hell. And when they go down in their wave, you can feel the weight of that seriousness. See, in the field of desire, the only thing that matters is getting the experience. Nothing else matters. The end justifies the means. Nothing else matters. Nothing. It's not personal. It doesn't care about the other. It just has to have it. If it feels good, I gotta have it. You know. That's us. It's a great thing to notice. Now look, you get to the 36 gate. The 35-36 is the channel of talent for the abstract process. Sexually, it's about sexual talent. At the mundane level, it's about experiential talent. Been there, done that, know how to do it, can tell you. In other words, it's that whole process of going through the experience. And once you've gotten through the experience, then the ability, then the possibility of being able to share the experience with others. After all, the 35 being a throat gate. But think about the 36. And think about the 48. Now they're different. They're different in that the 36 is sitting in a motor and the 48 is not. Now they are both gates of frustration, but the 48 is much more frustrated. Much more frustrated because it's a projected element rather than a manifesting element. But there is a difference. The 48 can be bitter, projected element. It can be bitter that it's not recognized. But the 36 with the 35, it gets emotionally angry when it cannot get to what it desires. Emotionally angry when it cannot get to what it desires. Now, if the 48 can't get to the 16, it's bitter. Nobody sees my depth. Nobody sees my ability to be able to go down into the core and to bring out a solution. Woe is me. Nobody sees me. But there's nothing to be done. But the 36 in its anger as a manifesting force can act out. And what happens is that the 36 sits there and it stores in all this emotional desire, energy, waiting for that opportunity to get all of that out. Now the gift of the 36 is to penetrate. Like the well, going deep inside. But the difference is that the 36 penetrates the surface and the 48 penetrates the depth. In other words, the 36 is there to penetrate, to break through into the experience, but it's not there to go into the depth of the experience. In other words, it's not there to explore it at the intellectual level, to go into deep layers of it. It's about, let's make love and see you next time. It's penetration for the sake of penetration. Otherwise, the desire never gets fulfilled. That 36 gate. Remember that it is the gate of crisis and the darkening of the light until we have a transformation in the solar plex system. Now, it's never going to be aware, but the rest of the solar plex will operate differently. And the whole thing about the nature of the 36 gate is that when it's operating correctly, that means when the total being is operating out of their strategy and their type, what the 36 gate is intended to do is to bring somebody else who's at their weakest point to a point of crisis in order for them to be able to go on and grow. See, 36s are always bringing crisis into other people's lives. Always. You know, it's not just them being a crisis machine themselves. They bring crisis into other people's lives, but that's not a negative. You're only going to be attracted to a crisis person because you need one. You know? I mean, if you're going to live with an emotional person and you're unemotional, you deserve it. You know? It's yours. I mean, after all, that's where we go to school in life. We go to school in those centers we don't have. I mean, that's what it's about. We all end up with that in their process. I cannot escape sacrals. You know? What the hell am I going to do with them? I can't escape them. Maybe there's a way. Move to another planet. Only take manifestors with me. What a busy place. Eh? You're not invited. The 35th gate, gate of progress. That doesn't say it all. Desire leads to progress. You know, let's be unaware, let's be desirous, let's do what feels good. That's progress. I mean, you got philosophers going back thousands of years that said, do what feels good. You know, it's the best thing possible. And of course, everybody said, geez, you can't say that. You know? I mean, that's the whole thing about being purely human. Purely human is really something. You know, it's really something. Hey, let's have fun, man. You know, I mean, kill without remorse, love without remorse, you know, work without remorse. I mean, it's being human. Incredible thing. I mean, if it wasn't for all these other tones, you know, what a vicious lot. Self-absorbed, lost in desire, raging up and down, and that's progress. You have to be able to give everything a name in this life. And you have to be able to see it all to give it a name. And you have to know what it is. You have to experience it. I mean, that's us. You know, we're the great tasters. You know, we take in everything. You know, every root, every animal, every creature. You know, I remember watching Mondo Cani in the 70s, and there was these people eating chocolate-covered ants. And I thought, shit, that's weird. But then again, people ate grubs forever. There's still people who eat grubs. You know, I mean, human beings, that's us. We are intended, we are meant to go through every single possible level that we can. Take it all in, take every ounce of it, regardless of what the hell it is, you know, and not worry about the consequences, which is the most amazing thing. I mean, that's why the abstract and the collective has such a dynamic polarity. You know, the logic saying, wait a minute, this isn't good for us. No. Everybody gets off work at 5 o'clock, okay? I mean, otherwise we've got a problem. You know, we got to keep our kids in school till 4. They can't just go out and do what feels good. We're going to have chaos here. And this is where you get this, you get this intellectual thing about being civilized or not. You see, the abstract is basically uncivilized. I mean, you know, I'm talking about this abstract stream. You know, it's uncivilized. If you, the fifth tone has, no, it's America. No, really, it's America. What's that joke? America went from barbarism to decadence without a civilization in between? This is America. Everybody's just roaring around. You know? And of course, desire has been progress here. And I mean, all over this planet, everybody wants to be, at least, if not able to come here and suck up on the great golden mountain, you know, at least to be able to import it back home. You know, let's have that too. That's the whole thing about the fifth tone. When you begin to realize that all of the components that make us up, that there are various components that we have been conditioned to look upon with our noses in the air, to frown upon, to think lesser of them, you know, to see that these are things that are poor or bad traits or things that we should eliminate or not nice or whatever the case may be. And you know, the fact is that this fifth tone, without it, we wouldn't have ever gotten to that position of being that critical. We never would have gotten to the point of saying, no, we can't just be like that. Because we're not just that. You know, it's like what I hope you grasped when we went through the bases and we went through understanding the dimensional relationships of the bases. Only one base was about being human. We're in a life program. You know, we take our humanness personally and see it in its unique specialness. But in fact, we're in a life program. And that most of the programming that's going on around us has to do with everything but us in that sense. It's about life. So when you're looking at all the tones, the Department of Planning is interested in life. It's interested in maintaining a coordinated, viable, emerging consciousness. You know, that's its job. Part of that is, in order to be able to stimulate the intellectual aspects of that evolving consciousness, you got to have us. I mean, that's what all this running around does. It provokes. You know, it starts things going. People come and go and die, and there's fights and wars and love and rape and this and that and yeah, la la la. You know, and then we go to all this work about how do we control this? How do we do something about our basic humanness? Because our basic humanness is frightening to us. Not only is it frightening to us, we don't really get it because we don't like it. You know, these vehicles, we are helpless in the way in which they are designed and operate. There's fifth tones here in the room, eh? You know, if it wasn't for them being in the room, we couldn't go about our human life. It's what's so important to understand. Yes, if you isolate it, like anything, if you isolate it, you can then get into a whole judgmental pitch about this side of it and that side of it and blah, blah, blah and everything else. But you have to see that if you're carrying that tone, you're carrying that tone for all of us. And when the change comes, we'll wipe the damn thing out. That's all, you know. And until then, well, what to do with you, you know? Keep on cranking. That's us. You know, we got to crank till the end. Nothing's going to stop that. The 35th gate. The 35th gate is a stop codon. Now, basically what that means is that there's a brake. Like the brakes in your car. You know, if you look at the language of the 35, the language of the 35 is I feel, and usually I feel like a change. Usually, not always. That's where we get that expression, been there, done that. That's the point where the usually, you know, no thanks. I've had that experience. It also means that the 35 has the capacity, it's the only part of the abstract process that actually has the capacity to put a lid on desire. Interesting to think about. In other words, when you say, I've been there and done that as a 35, that's an enormous accomplishment. I mean, you're ruled by desire, and desire is no longer ruling you, and the reason it doesn't rule you is that you've had the experience. You see, nothing's more important. Desire dies the moment the experience is had. You know, that's why abstract sexuality can be so devastating to people who don't know what they're getting into. Because the moment of orgasm is the moment that you fall off the mountain in terms of the wave, and you immediately crash because the experience has been had. You know, and you don't come off laughing. You know, you come off feeling unfulfilled. You know, it's like, well, isn't there anything else? Is this it? Is this what it's all about? In other words, you're always dealing with the 36 crashing the moment that it gets to that 35, and it's the crash that gives the 35 its power. He says, look, I've been there. It was okay, but I don't want to climb that mountain again and fall down again. I mean, that's too costly to me. I have been there. I've seen it, lived it. That's enough. See, the greatest risk to the abstract being is repetition. That's logical. You know, logic, you investigate the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. You know, but the abstract investigation of making love to redheads is not going to work out the same way. Each time they're going to have a crash. Each time they're going to feel like that they haven't got the answer. And each time there's going to be a moment in which that 35 says, never going to do that again. Brunettes next time. You know? Now they got to learn that the first time. See, that's the whole thing about being human, is that the interesting thing about the fifth tone is that yes, we are here to be running around in this feeling frenzy. Yes, we're out there to be doing things, but we're out there to be doing things once. In other words, we're there to be lost in the diversity. Now think about how uncomfortable that can be for somebody in their design who has a fifth tone, and that fifth tone is constantly driving them into the diversity and making it very, very difficult for them to feel like staying with anything is worthwhile. And remember, you can be a fifth tone person who's very logical. That can be very upsetting. You want desperately to be able to repeat and repeat and repeat, but there's something inside of you that says, hey, don't repeat. Let's do something else. Let's not do this same thing all over again. And remember, because you have no access to that, there's no way you can work with that. What will happen is that the logical person that carries the fifth tone, if they're honoring their strategy and type, remember, it always, always, always comes back to the same thing. It doesn't matter wherever I go in this knowledge. As a human being, to live correctly in this life, all you have to do is follow your strategy, nothing else. So the logical being who's fifth tone, who follows their strategy, will be able to get into a logical process that allows them to use different ways in the diversity to prove it. So they'll use this one way of looking at it, and then they'll try another way of looking at it, and then they'll try another way of looking at it. In other words, there'll be a way that it can come out as long as they enter into the right thing in the first place. But it's saying that at the psychological level, there's going to be this undertone of pressure that's there, because the fifth tone person is, they need to keep on going after the next experience. It says something about us sexually. See, the moment that you're looking at this abstract circuit, what you're looking at is that there is never a bond made. Never a bond made. A bond laid. Never a bond made. Right? Well, it's true. It's the way it works. And of course, that's the way we're designed. As humans. As humans, we're not designed as humans to be monogamous. We're not designed to be fixed in pair bonding as pure humans. We're here to be ruled by desire. If it feels good, do it. Now that's very human. And the way in which we pair bond is because of the animals, which I'll show you after the break. We're just following animal patterns in being bonded. That's not what we're like. That's not what we're like at all. The pure human is only interested in what's next. What's next? Next. Next. And that's male or female, makes no difference. So you can see that if you look at the pure human, I'll tell you a secret. This is hell to the Christians. This is the evil that lies in all of us. This is the curse of God. We are savage, relentless, desirous animals. And the collective hates that because it gets all squishy. The logic and says, no, we're not. See, look at that beautiful building we built last century. We're not like that at all. And my neighbor slept in the same bed for 60 years. Okay. But that's, if it isn't for the sixth tone, you forget about that. We would be endlessly chasing and hunting. Endlessly. So you can see what kind of pressure is there. Imagine the sexual pressure that's there on somebody carrying the fifth tone. If there's somebody that has abstract definition, if they've got a strong emotional system or a very open emotional system, oh boy, Sexuality can overwhelm them in their lives. Desire can overwhelm them in their lives, and they have no control over that. Because it's so much a part of what it is for us to be human. It's deeply, deeply, deeply competitive being human. The whole survival business. And getting what feels good might mean that somebody's in the way. So the 35th gate has a special quality, and that quality is, I don't have to go on to the next one. I can be satisfied at this point. That's quite a giant step for any 35. After all, the stream from the 41 to the 35 has to do with the hunger system in us, and has to do with hunger as a measurement system. In other words, if you can imagine the 41st gate and the 35th gate being gauges on your stomach, the 41st gate always tells you when you're empty, and the 35th gate always tells you when you're full. However, once you're full, eventually you use it up and become empty again. That's the cycle of life. And of course, that's a format in that stream which is deeply cyclical. So in the moment that the 35 says, I've been there and done that, it's usually only temporary. It's usually only temporary. The moment they're horny again, they'll say, well, maybe another redhead will do. As long as they've just finished the crash, it's like, no, I don't need them. But the moment that they go through in their wave, they'll come around again. Desire is a cruel creature. It does not let go of us. It is not intended to let go of us. There is nothing about being human and being desirous that is morally incorrect. It's only the way we enter into those experiences that can lead us into so much difficulty and pain. I have a deep love and respect for sex. It isn't about whether this is good or that's bad or all of these things. It doesn't matter what your morality is. If you enter into things according to your type, you don't enter into anything incorrectly. Somebody who has the 35-36 and carries a fifth tone, sexuality is not only essential in their life, they'll die without it. Oh, I'll tell you all a delightful, delicious story. Last week I was in Las Vegas, and I have a client who's seeing me, and she's 72 years old. She's a 35-36. And she has a lover. He's 74 years old. He's a 36, 30-41. The lover has, the guy has other lovers, and he has a wife that he's living with. So we're sitting out in the backyard, and she says to me, to inform me, she says to me about him, she says, oh, and he's a generator. And he looks at me and he says, no, I'm not, I'm an alternator. That's a fifth tone. That's what it's all about for them. And of course, it's delicious. You see people of that age, they're having a good time. It's very nice. It's about understanding that's part of what we are to be human. It's not about, I try each time that I can show you our nature stripped of our evolution, because that's all I'm doing, showing you this fifth tone this way. Remember that. I'm not showing you our evolution. I'm taking it out of context, as I've done with each of the other tones. Because after all, they all work together and it's seamless. So there's no way that you can really, just because somebody's a fifth tone doesn't mean that's what they are. If you look at their design, you'll see that, they have all these gates, they have all these different tones in them. We're a mix of everything. It's not about that. But what I want to show you is that when you get down to that pure level, to see us for what we really are. And in seeing us for what we really are, recognize that we're a passenger in that thing. We're a passenger in it. And we are always going to have to accept its limitation. Always. I am a 41. I have never in my entire life been free of desire. It is not possible for me to be free of desire. Fortunately, I don't have the rest of it. I don't have to do anything about it. However, doesn't mean the desire ever goes away. And desire's kind of sweet for me. It's sweet because I never get the sour. I never have to follow desire. I never have to chase desire. But it's just, to see that, to understand what we are, and to recognize how helpless we are in all of that, and not to be the collective to the abstract that says, no, not good. To see all these aspects of our nature within the context of our totality. In that way, you can see it in the context of the real totality. You see, it's like us, in a sense. It is all of this. All of this. The real thing is that we are the embodiment of this desirous program now. There is no other form that's carrying it the way we carry it. And so we're controlling the desire realm. And if you go to any good teacher, particularly Eastern teachers, they will talk to you endlessly about the glamour of desire. I mean, endlessly, because that's us. And is desire full of glamour. And that glamour is really incredible. It's really incredible. We're never allowed to be free of it because we won't finish our job. You see, if we're not, when you get to the top of the food chain, if you're not ruled by desire, you just sit back and stay there until it all falls apart. Until others learn how to adapt to you. Until you become weak, whatever the case may be. We're not allowed to stop. We're not allowed to end desire. It's not going to end. We're not going to get rid of it. We're going to be driven by sex and food and pleasure right to the very end. The whole thing for us is enter into it correctly, and then you can enjoy that banquet that the Maya gives us. I mean, geez, I'm glad I'm not a deer and I only do it twice a year. I mean, give me a break. There is joy in the desire field, but you got to enter into it correctly. We're not here to be ruled by desire. To be ruled by desire, that is only going to lead to deep, deep problems for us and for our societies. But we're here to appreciate it, take advantage of it. And that those that are truly desirous and follow that way, they teach us so much. They teach us that you can make love standing on your head. Not that any of us really care. But that's part of their thing. They teach us that you can survive in certain situations. They teach us all of that. So they have real value. So in looking at tone and looking at the fifth tone, remember something. That what truly makes it difficult is when the desire becomes equated with logical judgment. In other words, this is what I desire, therefore it's right, therefore I'm right. Now, of course, only logic can play that kind of game. All that the abstract can do is say, I desire, and I will enter into desire correctly. Then everything's perfect. I mean, then it's really perfect. Gee, if we had emotional people who entered into desire correctly, this would be a very blissful place. I mean, after all, if all the emotional people on planet Earth really had their shit together, it would really be a nice place. Instantaneously. Then all we have to do is heal all the splenic people, and then we could all feel good about being in a nice place. And then we have to clean up all the mental creeps, and then, let's have a break.